How many really levels down would we be where you get to people working and driving cars around the planet here?
I'd say that, the highest levels of aristocracy per se on the planet, as far as the humans go, is probably no more than maybe the equivalent of a sergeant, a drill sergeant. That's about it.
Yeah, right. You got it. That's exactly the perfect way to describe it. Yep, you hit it on the head. Hyperinflation, 11 million job openings, and an energy crisis. Sound familiar? It's like Jimmy Carter in the 1970s all over again. Americans are paying twice as much at the gas pump and the grocery store. The Democrats control all three branches of government, and there's just a couple of questions you need to ask yourself. Do you think you'll be better off in 2022 than you have been in 2021? And do you think the stock market will trade higher the next 3 years than it did from 2016 to 2020? If the answer is no, learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video.
The other thing, too, that I found interesting was the guides had talked about a certain level of food and supplies, but also they said you still got to be ready to be mobile. They did say that there's going to be pretty significant portions of the population that are going to become refugees here in the United States. There's going to be massive migrations of refugees. And I've always seen, for instance, Florida, there's going to be a ton of people leaving Florida. And I think it's going to be a big battleground because I think they will be bringing people over from Cuba, perhaps even the Bahamas. I see China's been buying their way into the Bahamas and other places, as well as coming over the border, California, coming down from British Columbia into the Pacific Northwest. Again, for us, I would say the last place I'd want to be really is on the West Coast right now. But the East Coast is in danger too. The whole coastal sides, you got to be very, very careful with. It's going to be really, really challenging anywhere on the globe. But I do think the U.S. is going to be one of the most challenging countries on the globe.
No, see, that's what you don't want to hear. Here's a real question for you, though. If you were going to rebuild your greenhouse, like you said, you're getting torn apart in the winds. These storms are going to get way, way, way more intense. So what you experienced, we're going to be a 10x increase. Could you have saved your greenhouse? Like if you're going to rebuild it, how would you harden that thing up against the wind damage that you were seeing? Huge front, wind front, weather front, etc. But greenhouse is going to go bye-bye. So give some idea, like how would you rebuild that greenhouse to strengthen it against the winds?
I think what I would do is I have 2,000 sandbags that are in the garage. So I'd probably make a windbreak for it and go from there, perhaps even encasing a portion of it within that structure and just letting more light come in from just straight above, as well as maybe even running some of my lights, my greenhouse lights, my grow lights, because I have like 25, 30 lights, grow lamps, and even utilize those if I needed to augment the photosynthesis going on if it became such a big issue. Because we do have 2,000 sandbags that we're going to utilize for a sandbag home at one point in time, but the desert, it just didn't feel good out there. The West Coast scares me, honestly. It does. I never felt comfortable that whole time out there. I could feel the inevitable earth changes, and just I know also that's going to be one of the zones that will be under control the quickest.
All right, so let me say something here about those sandbags that you're talking about, and at least I use them also as grain storage bags on like the 10 to 15 pound range. Because you go to the co-ops and you get a 50-pound bag. And Cindy, do you like picking up 50-pound bags? So I know
No,
my
not
wife doesn't. She wants a smaller bag. So we always take those 50-pound bags and cut them into about three. It'll be two very solid ones. And then you get like a half one bag. Think about it. Who's going to be helping around, pulling things, picking things up around the farm? So Cindy, you like those 50-pound bags to go carrying around and move from point A to point B?
I don't know, she only weighs two of them, so no.
Pick it up, you slacker.
yeah.
Yeah, in the worst case scenario, I was thinking about using the sandbags, but I was also thinking about using the sandbags for rain catchment, which I didn't even really think I had to think of here, but I could see, we're not getting the precipitation that we were supposed to. It hasn't rained like it should. We still get a decent amount of rain. It's not desert at all, but here we're supposed to get 3.5 inches typically in August. Every other month is 4.5 to 6 inches. It was a lot of rain in the spring, so much so that I was worried about flooding, and I could see flooding issues developing. But now it feels like that drought is moving farther over this way.
We had too much rain. This is a real question for everybody listening. The way he was describing how to rebuild a greenhouse and strengthen it and harden it up against winds, is this a person you want in your community with this kind of skill set? This is just a general answer because if anybody has this level of skill to keep your lives moving and make them more comfortable and be able to dehydrate food, grow food, provide electricity, clean drinking water, like you say, catchments, whoever has that skill set of being to understand something that's, a little technical. I mean, how welcome are they going to be in communities, just even knowing these skills?
When you're talking about that too, I know so many people that are looking for communities. And at the same time, when we're talking about intentional communities and coming together, then you get those interpersonal conflicts with, how are we going to do things? Well, I think we should do it this way. No, I think we should do it that way. Well, yeah, but I own 35% and you own 22% of this land, or however people are working it out. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. Don't you agree?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think compatibility is probably the number one most important component if you're putting together a community like that. It's super important to understand other people and at what level is their maturity and their skill set.
Well, that's a great point. Yeah. How would you define maturity, though? Obviously, mature enough not to throw food at people in a food fight at a table,
Above 3.
We were watching a movie it was about a real life battle where soldiers, on the battlefield, I mean, they don't always carry out orders per se. And there's always people that will take the easier way or be an opportunist. And if you're counting on them and entrusting them with your life, because you're entrusting them to be around grains and food and stock and livestock or whatever it is that you're all sharing, and then when the chaos hits, say a few of them decide they're going to book, and you know what? They're going to take everything with them. And then you turn around and everything has been heisted and in the middle of the night, or a big portion of it's gone. So you got to really be able to trust people. And people do change when they're under stress. Think about that. I know you have, David, thought about that. You know what happens. Think about times like the French Revolution and how desperate people are, what they would do to feed their own kids, sometimes, unfortunately, at the expense of friends and even family, other family.
Yeah, the things that are unthinkable now might this transition period. But again, what kind of test is this for us to go through this? We're going to go through something that hasn't been really experienced ever with the level of people on the planet right now and the amount of technology that will be lost to bring us back to, I would say, beyond pioneering lifestyle. If we can hold it together really well, it'll be pioneering lifestyle. It's almost like every construct that and have grown up with to know is a truth is going to be ripped out from under your feet and replaced with something new in a couple of years. A lot of people aren't in tune, but I'm wondering if things go awry and people are really moving around, as you say, if these solar cycles, lunar cycles, solar eclipses, lunar eclipses are going to have even a greater effect on people. This 2 years, it's going to rip their psyches to shreds. Like, is this the whole point, that the journey here is to have everything ripped to shreds and reassembled again on the other side in a different, more enlightened fashion, or like an upgrade of needs for the human? I don't know. There's going to be a lot of incredible events going on, though. Some of them terrible, some of them great as well.
We've learned a lot about how the universe works really in the last few months. It's been amazing through our meditation and channelings. It's truly been very, very eye-opening. And one of the reasons why the higher benevolent beings do not interfere directly is because this human experience, while we can't take, your possessions with you, you most definitely take your actions with you, your learning with you, your karma with you. And if you want to look at it like a video game, it really, in so many ways, is kind of like a video game. Yeah, the more we learn, it is very much so. I mean, we have avatars, right? These bodies are just vehicles. They're like avatars for us. And we can level up. And so the things that we do and achieve here, when we come out on the other side, it's like we're at a totally new level. When we're out of the body, our ability to affect soul growth is somewhat limited. It's vastly limited compared to when we're actually in a 3D crazy existence like this. This is where the soul can grow leaps and bounds, sort of prove itself. How are you going to handle these things? Are you going to help others? It's just like that lady that drops her purse, her little wallet, and she's got, her life savings sitting in it. And one person might wait for her to be out of the way and grab it, and another might go ahead and say, "Oh, ma'am, here, you dropped this." Those things make a huge difference when we get to the other side. And then what we can do as far as coming back in next incarnations, it really depends on what we do in this incarnations. These are the times that will test men's soul. It will also prove who they are. And what they achieve here throughout these most difficult times can set them up in the next life in a much more favorable position. Give them so many more options, not just that you might come back as a king or anything like that. Nothing like that necessarily, but just that you will have so many other opportunities to decide what you want to do moving forward instead of being, say, karmically bound. These beings that we're talking about that control this reality, when you get down to it, they're not really that powerful. They're not powerful at all. And when we are in a golden age, we're way more powerful than they are. It's just that when we dip down into this cycle, we get down to the point where they can start to exert their influence over us, and they trick us into giving our power away. But the reality is we are actually far more powerful beings than they are when we're out of this Kali Yuga.
Yeah, we are very much so. And, going back to the eclipse that's coming up, that eclipse is going to change a lot of frequencies, but there's been effects coming up to the eclipse because so many people are moving into alignment. So many people are feeling a pull here, a nudge there. So many people are releasing what no longer serves them. And after this eclipse, it's really going to change people's frequency, which is going to change their urges. It's going to change their instincts, what they want to do, what they don't want to do. So I'm really curious to see how this goes, to see, I know for myself and a lot of other people that we work with, it's putting them into alignment. It's saying bye-bye to some things that you might not want to say goodbye to, but hello to some things that are complete blessing.
You talked about leveling up there. And the only way I can kind of describe it is you've only ever learned to swim in like a little tiny swimming pool. And then you get plucked and dropped into 10-foot Hawaiian on a super smashing day. The level up of how the water's moving and the requirements to be able to swim and maneuver in the medium that you're in. I mean, that's such a night and day difference. I've only ever swum in a swimming pool and then getting some serious 10-foot from the back pounding reef face, like 15, 20 foot on the front of the face, smashing onto the reef. That kind of level up is what I could envision it as that step up you talked about, not like a little tiny step where you just gradually learned a tiny bit this time. Hey, you learned how to say thank you at the dinner table. Awesome. Okay, next lifetime. No, we're talking that super gigantic leap that you would consider almost becoming another person. That kind of growth acceleration. And, Kali Yuga coming out into the Dwapara Yuga, maybe the Kali Yuga could be renamed the Rainbow Yugo, because it's that same kind of energy that's trying to hold on and grab everybody and pull everybody back into that control net again. Kali Yuga, similar, it's that same energy vibe. They can be describing something in a similar sort of energy frequency.
These cycles, again, they do coordinate with the precession of the equinoxes. So it's that whole journey of the Earth. The solar system takes its rounds. We keep going through these areas of, it's kind of like a death and destruction zone. It's where horrible atrocities happen.
Happy Tuesday.
Yeah, but it is. Now, you had said something earlier when you were talking about, this is stuff we have never seen in these times, in this life. And that got me thinking about Oppenheimer's statement. The big test of the bomb, basically made the statement, now I'm like Shiva, the destroyer of the world. And somebody said, yeah, the first time it's ever been a nuclear bomb. And he said, yeah, in this era, in these times, because he knew,
in these
that
times
it happened in the past. And when we do use those type of weapons, they tear a hole in time-space. They affect beings on other densities. I wouldn't call the ones in power benevolent at all. And they don't care at all. They just know how to work the system so they get as little karmic repercussions as possible. When you go take a job, you're saying, okay, I'm taking part of this system, taking part in the system. So it's the people that drop out. They don't like seeing that. Why do you think they always want to see high employment numbers? They want to see a lot of people participating in their system. The last thing they would want to see is people making really larger, constructive, intentional communities where they were bartering and trading and not even using cash or any sort of digital currency. That's the last thing they'd want to see.
I think they're real professionals at emotional blackmail, at getting people to do things that they otherwise would not do. And this is about giving away our free will. If you go back to the emails and text messages that have these pre-written responses, don't do that. You're slowly giving your will to the AI. Don't teach the AI how to be more human. We need to work on stepping back away from our toys, away from our TVs, computers, laptops, and become closer with the planet like we used to be.
Something that Cindy has seen that looks to represent, oddly enough, kind of a black AI dragon.
That would describe it perfectly, wouldn't it? The energy of the time and the color right now, that describes exactly what the black dragon. Because in Chinese mythology, there's different types of dragons. You have the water dragon, the metal dragon, the wood dragon, earth dragon. Okay, but then there also is a color with it, earth water dragon or something like this. And it changes all through. There's different combinations, but black graphene dragon, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting enough. Now that seems to be the top of the pinnacle, the top of the pyramid.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you got all the ones that they've conquered, and many cases, like if we talk in the Ijiji, the group that revolted,
West Africa.
Said, well, the Ijiji are the ones that said we're not working those mines anymore. Now those are actually flesh and blood. So those are basically beings that are third density, and those are the ones that their offspring are the ones that are, the ones we see running the planet, so to speak. That's the bloodlines, the royalty is of the Ijiji. Basically like the Roman Empire. They go conquer a people. They might let them be self-autonomous to a degree as long as they keep carrying out what Rome wants and they pay their taxes and their tribute.
So we're several steps down then. If the black graphene dragon at the top, the Draco, the second level. And then, that what you consider the 1%ers of this planet, which are in control of corporations that dictate to government and lobby and have the, private militaries, et cetera. So, when we look at the top of the thing that's on the earthbound, so how many levels down truly, if we're starting way up at the top of the black dragon, is all the way down through the levels and then 1% here on the earth and down and down and down. Yeah, that's a lot of levels, because you're telling me there's royalty levels and the hierarchy as well. Probably the same, similar to this. You almost have double of what you see on the earth here. Pretty controlled into behave for the society in a certain way, and stepping even remotely out of that bound will get you ostracized in both civil society and family, both. How many really levels down would we be where you get to people working and driving cars around the planet here?
I'd say that, the highest levels of aristocracy per se on the planet, as far as the humans go, is probably no more than maybe the equivalent of a sergeant, a drill sergeant. That's about it.
Yeah, right. You got it. That's exactly the perfect way to describe it. Yep, you hit it on the head.
No real decision-making ability, no real power at all. And they do report to a being. There's one singular being that's left from the original EGG here on the planet. There was 3, 2 of them recently are no longer here. Something that's kind of inhibited their power, as there's only one of the original ones left. Now, that being actually remarkably similar, kind of like Palpatine, the Emperor from Star Wars, not dissimilar. And when you see what some of the popes look like, and sometimes, how they look grotesque, there's a reason, because, it's of the same bloodline. It is interesting. These beings are nothing in comparison. If you're, talking about like the Archangels, they're part of the force of creation. Extremely powerful beings that dwarf the highest level of these other beings.
Do you invoke the Archangels?
We work with them, yes. Since the last time you and I had really talked, we've learned so much about who we are and understand who we are to a much greater degree than we did previously.
Yeah.
Worth the trip.
Yeah, I mean, it does help when we come down into these Kali Yugas, when you can figure out, why did you descend down here? To ascend, it helps to understand why you're here to begin with. Once we start putting these things together, it really does seem to help people understand what their mission is, why they're here, what they're here to do, and what are their strong points. A lot of people don't even know where to start. What do I do?
Yeah, and it's hard to describe that in terms of how these dimensionalities work in a non-ethereal sense, because everybody's been locked through science of it's only, you hear that thing I'm knocking on? They don't even describe it as moving energy that coalesces to form a solid object, like, these atoms and electrons, and we're getting the same thing from the sun, and these different electrical particles and charged particles, dense particles, plasma, the vibration of the atoms and the molecules creating the thing that you think is hard there. It's not, it's an illusion. It's all energy field densities. So if you see a mountain range 20 miles in the distance, you're looking through an energy field for 20 miles because it's vibrating so fast it turned into a gas. Like if you'd have learned your world like this versus it's carbon and it turned into wood and it's a desk and that's it. Now go pay your carbon tax for cutting the tree to make your desk. The world will be completely different. If you understood it in the energetic sense, we'd probably make more sense of these different dimensional realms and the size of it. Think about maybe I'm over exaggerating or maybe even under exaggerating. Like a fifth dimensional being would be able to put the sun in its hand and kind of view it like you would a snow globe. I mean, that size, where the being itself would be 200 million, 300 million miles tall. You start to put things and frame it in reference of that largeness. A 500 million mile tall being grabbed our sun, that luminescent thing, 1 million miles around, and just picked it up like a marble and looked at it. And then that's the kind of people, it's hard to resonate. It's hard to describe or get people to understand what these different dimensional realms are capable of and what the sizes are and the power within these realms.
We are very limited with our vocabulary words that we have.
I know, you can't describe it. It's indescribable. You're right, Cindy. It is.
Right.
Literally, we do exist in the mind of God, so to speak. We're also living in the body of a being, literally living in a body of a being. And just like when, your mom and dad got together and created you, now your body is made from the material that mom and dad's bodies were made from, but you're unique and you're yourself. It's the same thing with souls too. I'm not sure if we ever talked about this, you and I, but like if, for instance, these beings, these devas, have multiple incarnations. You might be familiar with Krishna and Rama being a incarnation of Vishnu, the preserver. And in the Vaishnavite tradition, Vishnu is actually the creator, not Brahma. And Brahman is everything, the all. So that's always a little confusing for people that haven't studied the Sanatana Dharma. But each incarnation is distinct. So when, say, Krishna comes into being as Krishna, even though the oversoul is Vishnu, yeah, it's an incarnation of Vishnu, but it's a distinct, unique being that will always be a distinct, unique being. Even if it reintegrated back in with the whole, it would still have its own individual consciousness, as well as being able to share the collective consciousness of that being.
But again, when you're going back into these timelines of births and deaths and many millennia prior to, at the very scratching the surface takes us way out of traditional timelines, way outside.
I would venture to guess that a good chunk of the population sees it now, even if they don't want to talk about it.
Right. If they just were to look up and look at the sky, look a little bit, you will start to see the life force. And that's part of our evolution, which is still very important. And that's what all of the chaos is about. It's about keeping us away from our natural abilities, getting us to look everywhere else outside of our bodies. But don't dare look within. They really don't want that, because that's where the growth occurs. That's where the serious growth happens.
And even as the ascension process works and you go and reintegrate, you're still going to be you. So, that's kind of the beauty of this system is, we don't lose our uniqueness even as we reintegrate. When we talk about E.S.T, the being known as Isis to most of the world, she's sixth density and she's part of a collective. So they are a collective that have ascended together, and not on Earth. Her ascension wasn't here on Earth, even though she's recognized here on Earth. But she's still distinct, even though she's part of a collective where everything is shared and understood. There's no need to obviously speak on many of these higher densities. Everything is done telepathically. You just know. The information's always shared and exchanged. It's easy enough to say it, and it's another thing to live it, but ultimately there's never anything really to fear, because we never stop. Consciousness never really ends. It's eternal. It just is always just like energy. Can't change form.